Good morning. Today is Friday, December 15th, and this is a meeting of the Policy Committee of the School Board. We're happy to have new member, Mr. Jordan, and continuing member, Ms. Green, with us this morning, as well as Dr. Lutz, our Director of Support Services. We have 5 policies to review this morning, and I'm going to begin with Policy 006, meetings. These policies are being revised following notices from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association of recommended changes following changes to state or federal law in a few areas and updates to best practices that have been provided to us. If there are any questions about any of the policies, please don't hesitate to ask. It would be our intention to bring these policies forward for a first reading, 4 of them as revisions to existing policy and 1 as a new policy, and we would do so for first reading on January 16th, our regular meeting of the Board of School Directors next month. So policy 006, meetings, there are several minor changes, and I'll just share those with you here. So I'm going to tighten up my screen here for a second so I can go into the draft policy where you can see the edits. And so we'll just begin with, there are some existing components of our active policy 006 that we want to retain in the revision. And so this revision you'll see in green here, parliamentary procedure at a glance. That is the source that we use for our deliberations. And so we want to maintain that source under parliamentary authority. In addition to that, and you'll see there are no further changes under meeting notifications, presiding officer, quorum. All of these are as they exist currently. Under agenda notifications, you'll see that we want to notify to school directors at least 3 days before meetings. Typically, as you know, I do that through my weekly reports, which are at least 3 days in advance, typically more than that. Then in addition, you'll see under agenda preparation, we have this in our active policy and want to retain it in the revised policy. You always have a choice of who develops the agenda, and we like to do that. I handle that in cooperation with the board secretary and the board president. And that occurs on a weekly basis in check-ins that I have with our board president and vice president. And we'd be continuing that so that there's collaboration across the board in preparing the agenda and bringing any items forward. Under order of business, the recommended policy has these items in pink, but we actually have a more robust agenda and would like to keep that as it is. So you'll see in green, this is what we'd like to maintain as our order for the agenda. And Ms. Green has added that in. It includes all of our committee headings so that we can continue to have a really well-organized flow to our board meetings. In addition to that, you will see underneath voting, and I'll get there in a moment, I apologize. Under regular meetings, I've added in green a phrase that is included in our active policy, but was not in the recommended policy from PSBA that the board felt was very important when we reviewed this policy about 18 months ago. And we want to continue to have this option of a fully virtual meeting platform, either over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, when we meet only in the event of unforeseen reasons such as weather, pandemics, school closures, or any other emergent reason. This was a conversation the board committee had several years ago after the tornadoes struck Upper Dublin. And our thought was that we'd want to make sure that we could continue to have access to the public and continue to maintain the activities of the board and be able to do that in a fully virtual manner. This is in keeping with current law, and we do have the phrase in here, in accordance with law, so that if at any point there were an update or a change that was necessary, we would be able to follow the law in holding our regular meetings. And then, as I just started to say a moment ago, under voting, there's been 2 changes that have been recommended by PSBA. The first is under the provision regarding actions that require the affirmative vote of 2/3 of those voting in the presence of a quorum, that has been removed. And both of the items that were previously under that category, specifically incurring temporary debt and adopting or changing textbooks without the recommendation of the superintendent, those are now under affirmative votes of 2/3 of the full membership of the board. Essentially, what has happened there is that they want the full board and not 2/3 of the board for those 2 particular areas, incurring temporary debt and adopting or changing textbooks without the recommendation of the superintendent. And so you'll see those changes in bold below. That's letters F and I, that they have moved to be the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the full membership of the board. And then in addition, under actions requiring the affirmative votes of the majority of the full membership of the board, that's number 3, you will see 3 additions: approving or denying a charter school application, approving or denying multiple charter school organization applications, or establishing joint schools or departments. And so these are the only changes that are recommended from PSBA. We would absolutely want to have this entire policy reviewed by our legal department, but I wanted to make sure that the board was able to see it before we had our legal department do a final review. We have some time to do that between now and January 16th. Everything else in this policy is as it has been in the active policy. And then you'll see that in this draft, I've also crossed out the notes, but you can still read them. These are the notes from PSBA to let us know how to function effectively in our meetings. But again, I'd like to have the legal team review this one more time before it comes for a first reading on January 16th. Wanted to see if the board had any questions at all about the recommended changes to this policy. So Ms. Green and Mr. Jordan, is there anything that I can answer with regard to policy 006?
No, I don't have any questions in regards to that particular policy. I do understand the changing and wanting to have the entire board and then 2/3 of the entire board for those 2 issues that were represented.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, any questions for you?
No, none at this time. I understand the policy.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to refer this policy to our legal team so that we'll be in the position to move forward there. So the next item, Dr. Lutz is going to share, and this is policy 216.1. This is a brand new policy to the board. And so Dr. Lutz, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So like Dr. Yannicone shared, this is a new policy. It actually goes along with our student records policy. And this is just another method by which we are able to collaborate with outside agencies. So this policy speaks specifically to holding districts and courts accountable for maintaining appropriate student records when it comes to serious disciplinary offenses. So that would be students who possessed weapons, have alcohol or drugs, or commit violent offenses on school property. This also extends it to within 1,500 feet of school property, which is something new that hasn't prior been part of our policies. And so essentially, if a child is adjudicated, the juvenile court would then provide the district with that information prior to that student either enrolling or transferring into school here. We have currently in our registration process, these are questions that we ask of all students. It's required under PA law that we know whether a child has been expelled or has committed a serious offense, such as bringing a weapon, violating drug and alcohol policies, or having serious bodily harm caused to somebody else in the school. And so this would allow then our principals to share that information with teachers who work with the student, and we would be able to have that information here within our student records for any students, like I said, who transfer or enroll here within our district. Any questions on that policy?
No
No,
questions for me.
no questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you both. So we'll bring that policy forward for a first reading on January 16th. All right, so we're going to move to policy 251. And you'll see here in board docs, we have a 2022 version and a 2023 version. So the version we're looking at is 2023. And I'm going to, again, have Dr. Locke share this information with you.
Sure. So since the last time that we went through all of our policies and updated the policy around students experiencing homelessness, foster care, and other educational instability, this policy has actually gone through 2 changes at PSBA's recommendation. They are fairly substantive changes. And so what we're doing is we're kind of skipping over the 2022, which just had a couple of minor changes, and moving over to the 2023. This policy gives some broader definitions of both homelessness and foster care. And it gives us very specific things that we need to follow in order to support these students. I just want to let everybody on this meeting know these were things that we were already doing. So this isn't really new procedure-wise for us, but it is now captured in policy. And some of those things would be waiving fees and extracurricular activity expenses for students who are experiencing homelessness or are under the foster designation. And then it also provides some really clear definitions of school of origin, so that it helps us determine better what is the school of origin for both homeless and foster youth. I am designated as the district person who is responsible for identifying any students. We identify students in a couple of different ways. We ask on our registration forms when families are coming in. They are able to tell us when they initially enter the district that they are in fact not housed, or that they have foster students living with them. And then also, as you know, we have 4 social workers in all of our buildings, and part of their work is to make sure that they're kind of keeping their ears to the ground. And when they find out about situations with individual families, they're able to follow up, and then we're able to connect those families with resources, get them onto our homeless or foster list, and then provide them with the appropriate supports. This policy also brings into alignment Act 1 that was during the pandemic that our legislators put out, Act 1, and that's just an educational stability act that enables us to better track students who have experienced chronic homelessness, making sure that they graduate from school and are held to the same high standards as our other students in terms of credit requirements. So there's some language in this new policy that kind of further aligns that, so that Act 1 isn't just hanging out there by itself. This also talks about training opportunities for staff members and making sure that the district is documenting all the supports that we provide to families. It also helps us determine what is the best interest for students when they're enrolling here in school, and provide some further clarification around the laws in terms of who is obligated to pay for transportation for students. That is a shared expense. We currently already have a memorandum of understanding in place with the Montgomery County Office of Children and Youth, so that when we have students who are in foster care, we're able to very quickly and seamlessly provide transportation for them, because we already are working with them. And so that really has been helpful for us. And then the same thing for homelessness. Our transportation department is really great at outreaching and making sure that those costs are shared between both ourselves if the children are attending here, and then other school districts if the children are temporarily housed in other school districts. But there's just some clarification in this policy for how we do that. Any questions?
Dr. Watts, I want to make sure to draw attention, because we had made decisions based on our current practices, and I've highlighted this on the screen and the share screen. We had a choice to make with regard to students discharged from foster care and what is the length of time that they're permitted to continue with us. And currently, we utilize the semester. So, for example, if a student were discharged from foster care in October, they would be permitted to continue with us through the end of that semester, the end of January, without payment of tuition. Similarly, if a student were discharged in April, they would complete that school year in June without payment of tuition. So that is the current practice, and it's our request that we continue in that manner, provided the board agrees. We feel it's appropriate for students when they're discharged from foster care. It's important for them to be able to acclimate to where they are living at that time. And so certainly if a student wanted to leave when they are discharged and move to a new school setting, we would support that. But if they wanted to stay, we thought it was appropriate to allow for a semester switch, and again, without payment of tuition. We'd appreciate knowing whether or not you agree with those decisions that we've made in this particular section of the policy.
Definitely agree with that. It allows for a transition period. It allows for some choice in regards to the student that is leaving foster care, because that transition time is probably very, very difficult for particular students. So I think it's a good way of having some closure and providing support at the same time. So I think it's a good recommendation.
So I apologize. I do have a question. So
Of course.
in dealing with, in terms of this policy or this section of policy, are we talking about those students who are placed out of foster care because of age, or are we talking about they're going to like a more permanent resident, or being placed with, or should I say, being adopted by a family? I just wanted to get clarification.
It's a great question, Mr. Jordan. Dr. Lutz, why don't you share a little bit about the ways in which students can be transitioning out of foster care?
Sure. So there's really two main ways that students transition out of foster care. One would be that they're adopted either by the family that is fostering them, and we do have several families in the district who have chosen that option. And then also there are students who are reunited with their biological parents. And so their parents may have met their parenting plan. And so those students would then transition out of foster care, return to their biological parents. And in most cases, their biological parents are in a different school district. So this just allows the child a little bit more stability as they're, completing that transition. In terms of students who are currently in foster care and are being adopted out, chances are they're already residing in our district. And so for us, that just allows us some time to, on the back end, because we report out on all of these students to the state, it allows us to get our data moved over, make sure we have all the appropriate court documents in place to help us make that transition legally for the students. So we're moving those parents over from foster parents to legal guardians in the system. But in most cases, when students do that, they're remaining here at Springfield.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying it for me. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I also just wanted to make a note here under comparable services, and this is consistent with current policy, but we do not provide preschool programs, as you know, and so we've deleted that option underneath comparable services. And I think, Dr. Lutz, you'll confirm for me, you've already spoken about the Keystone, the diplomas. So I believe that's everything that we wanted to share with you with regard to policy 251. We would bring this forward as a revision to policy, which would only require one reading, and that would be on January 16th before adoption. Are there any questions?
I just have a question now that that explanation was given in regards to the two ways a child can leave foster care. When a child is reunited with the biological parents that live outside of our district area, what is that transportation? Who's responsible for that?
Typically, we would share that with the agency. Whoever the placing foster care agency would be, they would work with the parent to establish whether the parent is able to provide transportation, or whether the agency will support the parent in providing transportation. In some cases where transportation can't be set up, sometimes the parent will opt to just transition the student at that time. Because it may be easier for the family. This is just an opportunity that allows the student to stay here should they wish to.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you both very much. So I'm going to drop down now to policy 815. And you're going to see here there are a number of ARs within board docs. And you can see that we're going to actually be looking at policy 815, volume 4 from 2023. That is the policy that has been recommended. And this was part of an October update. And I'm going to say from the outset, this policy is going to continue to evolve. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but we do think it's important to try to maintain as current a policy as possible. So it may be that later this year we have to revise again. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But policy 815, acceptable use of the internet, computers, and network resources, has been reviewed by Mr. Lutz, our new director of technology. This is another policy that I would like to have reviewed by legal before I bring it forward for a reading for revision. And I will do that, assuming that you agree with the changes that are recommended. So policy 815 was reviewed by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association based on updates that were issued earlier this year related to data governance and security and breach notification for computerized personal information. While revisions to the policy were not required based on law or regulations, several minor revisions were also made throughout the policy based on feedback received from school entities consistent with other policy documents and alignment with E-rate requirements and some local court decisions. So among the revisions to the policy are definitions for computer to provide clarity in policy terminology, updates to the list of options that boards may establish as inappropriate matter based on court decisions, and to clarify terminology that may be overly broad or vague. There's a clarification that technology protection measures may be adjusted in appropriate circumstances outlined in policy, but would not be fully disabled following E-rate requirements. There's some update to the list of prohibitions to clarify terminology, and there's addition of terminology and policy references to address encryption and security procedures. There's also a new section on accessibility for district websites and web pages, and that was added for consistency with similar language in policy 816 on district social networking. I actually spoke about this, and both Ms. Green and Mr. Jordan, you know, you were in attendance at our Multicultural Parents Association meeting on Wednesday, where I spoke about some of the efforts that the district has been making to make sure that our website is accessible as possible, and particularly for those who are visually impaired. And so we'll continue to do that to make sure that we're working on full accessibility. This policy is mandated under state and federal law with regard to the Children's Internet Protection Act, and it's also required for E-rate, which is one of our reimbursement programs. And so you can see under definitions, these are updated definitions to what is defined as child pornography, what is a computer. And you can see here the definition of a computer has been expanding and probably will continue to expand. What is and is not considered harmful to minors. What is considered obscene. And then what is a technology protection measure. And as I said, this is a continually evolving policy that I think will absolutely, given the age of artificial intelligence, be continuing to be updated. There is within the policy some commentary from PSBA in their recommendations with regard to artificial intelligence. And essentially what they have shared with us is that they're not ready to provide us guidance on artificial intelligence, but they are working on it. And so I do anticipate in the relatively near future that we will see additional changes to this policy. I do want you to see that we have the option for what will not be accessed as inappropriate matters by minors. And you can see, and this is all work that Mr. Lutz is doing with his team with regard to our filtering, that we have checked every box in regards to inappropriate manner that will not be accessed by students. And so you can see there that all of those elements are to be included in our filters. In addition to that, there is some commentary here with regard to protection measures and what we are permitted to do with regard to our filters. As you know, we have a cybersecurity plan that we continue to refine to make sure that our network resources are filtering to the greatest extent possible in accordance with the law. In addition to that, we have checked here underneath delegation of responsibility that within Springfield Township, because we do have a one-to-one program that we do track in order to be able to recover lost or stolen equipment. So our student devices are tracked, and we do notify our families within this policy that we track our devices to be able to find out where they are if they are lost or stolen. And that has been very helpful to us and sometimes helpful to families. If they have not been able to locate a Chromebook, we can tell them, hey, it's at your beach house. It's down in Avalon right now. Or to assist families and us in determining where devices are located. In addition to that, you'll see at the end of this policy, and I'll just scroll down here, we do have that the district shall, rather than may, make sure that we are providing a fully accessible website. And then you'll see that all of this language in bold is the new language for accessibility. And we're working very hard to make sure that our website is as accessible as possible. And then you'll see here, these notes are provided for the administration and the board, but we would not include the specific language in the published policy. But certainly we are following state and federal guidance with regard to the Internet Protection Act. And then we absolutely have information with regard to tracking. And so we want to make sure that that's included in the policy. The only other thing that I wanted to share with you is just some updates on what we are doing with regard to policy development for artificial intelligence. And you don't see this in the language, but I wanted to make sure that the board was aware. Currently, Mr. Lutz, one of our technology specialists, Mr. McHugh, and myself, we are in the midst of attending a 3-day workshop on artificial intelligence in education. We've had, yesterday was the second of the 3 days of training. And one of the things that we are working on right now is the potential for a policy on artificial intelligence. We surveyed the entire staff, teaching staff, in in early December to gauge their awareness and use of AI tools. And we are going to be reviewing all of that survey data and providing an update to the staff at each of the 4 buildings at faculty meetings in January. And then we are going to be forming a committee internally to review potential policy and practices guidance for the staff. And our goal is to have a policy in place no later than September of 2024 that will provide very specific guidance to our staff with regard to what we believe as a school district with regard to the use and accessibility of artificial intelligence, both for the ways in which it can be helpful to provide support for students in a variety of manners, and also how we can protect the privacy of our students and staff with regard to the emerging programs that are connected to artificial intelligence. Yesterday's workshop provided some examples of existing wearable technology devices that would provide artificial intelligence resources for staff and students. It's this little device. It's about 2 by 2 inches that you can actually wear. And so we're not there yet, and we may not get there in the next year. But certainly there are a number of companies that are actively working to bring higher level artificial intelligence to make systems more accessible for students and staff within the educational realm. And so it's a rapidly changing environment. ChatGPT alone is just over 1 year old. And we want to make sure that our staff and our students have the ability to both have access, but also be protected. And so that's sort of the 2-pronged approach we're taking. But wanted you to know, currently you don't see any of that in this policy. We do anticipate bringing another revision to this policy sometime in the next 6 months in order to be responsive to what we know is a rapidly emerging landscape in acceptable use. So I know that's a lot to take on, but are there any questions, Ms. Green or Mr. Jordan, with regard to the current revisions that are recommended in this policy or the potential future with regard to AI?
I don't have any questions in regards to the current policy, but I'm really excited about what's going to happen in regards to the AI and coming out of the workshop. And I'm curious to hear about the device later. So I'm glad that you're forward thinking and attending the workshop so that we can bring the best back to our staff, and then what will also benefit the students in our district.
For me, I don't have any questions at this time. As you know, Dr. Yannico, we spoke about this earlier in regards to the potential risks. So hopefully we can look to mitigate that and put some policies and procedures in place to make certain that our students are best equipped to handle this going forward.
I appreciate that, Mr. Jordan. I know this is a particular area of interest for you and frankly, background. And so we'll be wanting to have some future conversations. I want to start with a staff committee where I can hear from our teachers specifically and our students with regard to what they are hopeful about and what they are fearful about with regard to artificial intelligence. And then we'll absolutely be involving the board in those larger discussions and members of the community. I think this is I think about Huxley's Brave New World, and we continue to be emerging in that area, but we really want to make sure that protection and safety is our first priority, and then access and opportunity are close second there. And so we'll bring that forward. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this particular policy discussion, this is another policy that I want to make sure that our legal department reviews before we bring it forward to the board. And I'll make sure that that happens so that you feel very comfortable with each iteration of this policy. All right, so the last policy that we're going to review is policy 819. And again, I'm going to refer to Dr. Lutz, and I'll bring forward that latest policy, which is the 2023 version. And Dr. Lutz, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So this is our policy for suicide awareness, prevention, and response. There are some pretty substantial updates, which include some definitions about commonly associated terms for this policy, such as behavioral health, resilience, and what a safety plan is. When we reviewed this policy with the clinical team, we were actually really excited to see that it aligns with our current practices. So there's not a lot of changes that we'll be making internally. Rather, this policy kind of updates what we've already been doing. And some of the reason for that is that if you look into the little highlighted footnotes there, what you'll see is a lot of this has been recommended by Dr. Terry Ehrbacher, who is an expert in her field and someone that we actually work with here in the district. She has provided our training to our clinical teams, both for threat assessments and suicide assessments. But this policy just updates awareness and prevention education for students. The district is already providing things for students in targeted grades, both through our health curriculum and also our social workers work with a variety of outside agencies to bring in some class presentations. So for instance, we've done signs of suicide with a lot of our high school students so that they're able to recognize some of those warning signs in their friends, and then they're able to report that to adults and get their friends the support and help that they need. Some other revisions in this policy include professional development for staff, which the Pennsylvania Department of Education has already built in as requirements. We actually take that beyond. Our social workers present every year to all of our staff on what to do if you have a student, some common phrases that you may hear people say, and other warning signs. This also gives some information about Safe to Say and how calls can come in through that hotline. Safe to Say is a Pennsylvania-wide hotline that students and or parents, teachers, community members can report concerning behaviors to. If we do receive anything about suicidal ideation, that comes out to our team 24/7. We get that notification. And then we work in tandem with law enforcement to make sure that they're going out and doing a safety check on the student in the home. So that's just an additional layer of protection there. We also have very clear internal things that we follow to ensure that we're providing assessments for students if they do express suicidal ideation or if we have concerns about their mental health. Those have been in place prior to this policy, but this policy really does speak to how we will maintain all of those records, how we're making sure that we're providing parent notification when we are screening. And then we make sure that we store all of those documents. We typically have a debrief at the end of the year so that we can kind of pass on that knowledge if the students are transferring schools, just so that our clinical team has eyes on students who are of particular concern. There's also some language in here about students with disabilities and making sure that the team then responds to the appropriate paperwork, whether that be the IEP or the 504 team, to make sure that they're following up with students. Any questions on this policy?
No questions from me at this time.
And no questions at this time.
All right, so thank you both. So this policy will also come forward for a revision on January 16th. The policies with regard to homelessness and suicide prevention, we do feel are fine as is. And so I won't use those, and I'll stop share now. I won't feel the need to have our legal team review those. They're very widely accepted best practices. But as I discussed earlier, I do think that the meetings policy 006, as well as 815 acceptable use, do warrant a legal review before they come forward to the board. And so I'll confirm that with you. It is my expectation that we'll be able to do that on January 16th. But if for any reason our legal team feels that we need other substantive changes, we'll pull the policy committee back together before we put them in front of the full board. Are there any other policies that either of you would like us to be reviewing or considering heading into the into the winter?
No, I don't have any other.
Mr. Jordan, are there any other policies you have concerns about?
No, none at this time.
Okay, thank you. And so we'll continue. Typically, we anticipate that roughly quarterly, we do receive an update from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, and they provide us guidance. And so, just as a refresher, we went through the entire policy book over the last 2 years. And so when revisions come forward, they will always be based on updated law or updated best practices guidance, as these policies have been. Some of these policies that are going to go up for revision on January 16th were revised as recently as last spring. But when the law changes, we will continue to change with it to make sure that we're always having policies that are in accordance with the most recent legal guidance. And so I appreciate your attention this morning. I promised you we would try to keep this under an hour, and we did pretty well, I think, at 45 minutes. And if there are no further questions, Mr. Wexler, I'll just double check. Do we have anybody from the public here for public comment?
There are no members from the public present.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So then I'm just going to ask Ms. Green, historically, you have been doing the board report. Are you okay with that on January 16th? So we will provide you summary notes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And moving forward, Mr. Jordan, if you ever want to turn, I'm sure Ms. Green would be happy to share the stage with you. But Ms. Green, if you can take January 16th, that'd be great. I appreciate that. We'll get the notes to you, and we can adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you both. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.